Today, we are going to talk about the iPhone SE for 2022. I have it in front of me, and I realize that I'm still getting a lot of questions about it. I think it's kind of interesting that this thing still exists. I said that the last time around, and this conversation is now continuing. And I think we're actually at a transition point now, where we're starting to see reports emerge. Maybe Apple overestimated the amount of interest, not just in this small phone, but potentially in small phones in general. This is probably the worst phone that Apple makes at the moment. I realize that statement means absolutely nothing. Ultimately, this is the Apple phone for people on a very strict budget. This is the only Apple phone you're going to get that's new in 2022 that costs less than $500. They did raise the price ever so slightly, but it is kind of bizarre that this thing in this format still exists. Now, that doesn't mean there's not an audience for it. I think it does some things exceptionally well, but it is a completely different approach than the rest of the industry in terms of giving you all of this horsepower, then lacking in all of these other typical expectations. All right, so where does this slot into the lineup? Let's take a peek. The 13 Pro, we're all well aware, it starts at $1,000, totally different price bracket. You could get two of these for the price of one Pro. But of course, that has a 6.7-inch display, or at least up to in the Max variant, which will cost you more than $1,000. On the SE side of things, you're looking at a 4.7-inch LCD. And the LCD, it leaves a little bit to be desired when it comes to brightness, resolution, and so forth. But that's gonna depend on individual, how much you're able to pick up on something like that, or if you've ever even used any of these other displays. For people like us, it's a constant reference point. We're playing with devices with OLED displays that are tremendous to look at, then we switch back. We're a little bit more sensitive to those things. You may not be. The camera system is going to be a single camera. Again, in 2022, only Apple can do this. There is an audience for this, believe it or not. A15 across the board, it's the 4-core GPU variant. This is where this device shines. You're only spending $429, but you're able to brag about the fact that you have probably the fastest mobile chip that's out there, if that's the thing that you would brag about. But are you the SE customer? I don't know. It's also got 5G cellular, but they're not calling it super fast. Their version of super fast. Battery life is going to be your biggest consideration and potential drawback with this phone. You probably already know this, but I feel the need to reiterate. This is really old-fashioned battery. This is 1992 type battery. Okay, it's a little bit better than that. 15 hours of video playback is what Apple says. Of course, I have watched a tremendous number of battery tests on this device, and this thing will barely make it through the day. The Pro Max model has tremendous battery life. It's one of the best, most important specifications on that phone. It's one of my favorite things about that phone. So imagine almost double the battery life if you step up to a Pro model. Touch ID, the only party in town for Touch ID fans. So $429, what does that get you in 2022? Gets you an option of 3 colors. Product Red, obviously, Midnight, and Starlight. Because we have fancy names now, you're obviously not getting a power brick in the box. That's okay. We have support from Anker as usual, and thank you to Anker for sponsoring this video with their Nano Pro charger. Also, funny enough, to showcase to you how nostalgic the iPhone SE design is in 2022, our later case that we're selling for the device is compatible not just with the iPhone SE and the previous generation of it, but also the iPhone 8 and 7. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So let's start with the Product Red Apple unboxing experience. You know it's going to be pretty typical. Boom. So Product Red, I'm holding this phone now, and it brings me to I think when people pick this up, there's definitely nostalgia that takes place because we've all held something like this before, but there's also just sheer portability that strikes you immediately. This thing is so thin and light in 2022, especially compared to Apple's other products with the squared off edges and the kind of like jewelry appeal, but also you kind of got a brick in your pocket. This is less of a brick. It is tremendously thin. Okay, let's do a quick peel on the Product Red. We've only got 4.7 inches. Your old school chin and forehead design. This time around, it feels downright ancient, but I think that is the agenda for 2 reasons. First and foremost is a lot of people want to upgrade to a more modern processor, use all their modern software and so forth, but they actually don't want to learn any type of new form factor. They want what they're comfortable with. And then there's also the people who basically want the cheapest iPhone they can possibly get, and they're willing to take whatever it is that means. It's important to note at this moment that the form factor, the actual external form factor on this device is almost identical to the mini iPhone, the iPhone 13 mini, 12 mini. That device, people are wondering about the existence of it as far as future generations of iPhone are concerned, because we also have reports about that one. As much fanfare as was made of it, apparently consumers disagree. The word is that it's not selling that well, and much of Apple's assembly has been moved over to iPhone 13, standard iPhone 13. At least this one has the cheap factor. You will have nothing but a lightning cable. Is this a cheaper SIM tool than Apple has used in the past? I think it actually is. Maybe I haven't opened a SIM tool in a long time. Now, when you go to charge it, I recommend one of these devices from Anker. This is the Anker 521, otherwise known as the Nano Pro. It actually comes in 2 different colors, dual fast charger. So this is a lot better than what you're going to buy from Apple, especially considering the price point, and you're going to be capable of charging more things. So check that out. Cool sort of violet color variant here. 2 USB Type-C ports on there. Lovely. And of course, we're talking about up to 40 watts max. That's a tremendous amount of dual power. If you're not bold enough for that violet color, then you can go for this kind of chrome / charcoal look. One charger to rule them all. You can always count on Anker. I'll link these down in the description if you buy this phone or any new phone. Let's move on now to Starlight. Here you can pick up the lightness champagne light color around the exterior. The white coloring on the back, otherwise unboxing experience is identical. We'll place those beside each other. It's kind of a nice white. And last but not least is the most boring phone that Apple makes in 2022. It is the black or midnight. That is if you want to turn absolutely no heads, if you want to be as stealth as possible. Some people might look at you and assume that you're using a phone from a number of years ago, even though you know you're not. You know you're packing A15 power in there. But here's the problem, okay? You got all this power in here, and you might want to throw some, I don't know, video games or something at it because you have an A15, and that's where that battery really starts to chug, and you really start to get concerned, and you get range anxiety as if this were an electric vehicle or something. Because you get up to like 6 p.m., something along those lines, and I know this A15 is a little bit more efficient, but again, I've watched enough content to see exactly what's going on. You get to that evening point and hopefully you have your Anker power brick with you, or hopefully you have an external battery. But that's another thing to mention, those MagSafe accessories, there's no MagSafe in here either. It's kind of tough deciding which is the right phone for you. In Apple's lineup in 2022, obviously cost is kind of that initial point of consideration, but if you can spend a little bit more on the mini while it's still there, it's going to give you a lot more modern look and feel. And then I get even crazier and say, if you're watching a channel like this and you're a tech enthusiast, then battery life is probably tremendously important to you, in which case, as much as you might like certain elements of this classic design, it just might not be the phone for you because it is not a battery champion by any means. Okay, now if you did want to spice up, let's say the black model, you could of course slap a later case on, and this is going to give you one of the most ultra portable smartphone setups for 2022. Look how thin and light that entire package is. Of course, the later case aims to be the thinnest and lightest case you're going to install on your phone in 2022, whether it's an SE or otherwise. Of course, we make these for all the top models, and we have a number of colors. I've got another one to showcase here. That is the Willy Do Blue with that linen-like finish. These things are stupid thin. If you haven't checked one out yet, you should. I'll put a link in the description to those also. So portability being the #1 characteristic, or traditional input, Touch ID, maximum familiarity, and an A15. Now, because you have an A15 in here, you're also getting some of these benefits when it comes to processing for your images. And even though you've only got a single camera unit on here, you're gonna get all types of advantages that come along with the more expensive devices on the software and processing side. And I've been using the opposite of this device, which is the Galaxy Z Fold 3, which is enormous. And just typing my Wi-Fi password on here, I screwed it up. It took me 3 tries. So I'm sure I would get used to it. That's a big swing. That's a big switch. You've got a 120 hertz display over there. It's all very vibrant because it's OLED. And then you come to something like this and you really feel as though you've entered some type of time machine. All right, we're gonna go ahead here and set up Touch ID. Now, Touch ID is nice, and there's been rumors that Apple's gonna figure out a way, at least eventually, although who knows how far in the future, to figure out Touch ID either in display or maybe on the side button, as they've done in some iPad models. That could have been a nice little touch. I am in. Welcome to iPhone, and as expected, it's snappy to use. No problems there. I find the touch input to be maybe a little bit less responsive, but that could be the refresh rate kind of screwing with my head a little bit. As far as brightness is concerned, let's boost that up. It's an LCD display. It looks okay. I mean, you could totally live with it. One of the benefits of having an A15 in here is that, like, as far as future proofing is concerned, you're not really too worried about compatibility or support in the future. Like, this thing is going to be relevant for a really long time from a processing perspective. But as far as feeling antiquated, I don't know. Now let's go ahead and launch into the camera here, and we'll take a couple of sample photos. I have a coffee cup here. Let's try that out for starters. Now this is one of those places where you benefit from Apple's expertise on the more premium products. You get a little bonus there. And I think it's gonna be tough to really take bad photos with this. How about a color checker? Let's check some color accuracy. Vin's really gonna appreciate this. It is odd interacting with such a small, like, my hands are not enormous, and it's crazy how much we've moved away from this in many circumstances. I really do feel the need to pull out my Z Fold 3. Like, it's just so different. So much space. It's just a totally different experience. Now, this has a crease in it, and everybody knows about the Z Fold, so let's not get carried away. It's a ridiculous comparison. It's $2,000. Nobody's cross-shopping these two devices, but for a person in my position, I have to mention this is the world I'm living in, where I transition from devices like that to devices like this. And if you're ever watching content from people who do it professionally, you have to know that that is what the exposure feels like. It feels like it's hard to make that mental adjustment to put myself into the shoes of somebody who's in the market for this phone in 2022, which is somebody other than myself. But I try. And I don't mind trying on the outfit and imagining that this is the phone I'm going to use every day. You know, I do a little bit of sports, I do a little bit of coaching. I think this thing could kind of disappear into my pocket. And if I was using it primarily for music, not so much screen on time, and if I wasn't doing a tremendous amount of work, I think the case could be made for it. But even there, I'd be looking at the mini model in order to achieve a slightly more advanced screen to body ratio, because I'm carrying this whole form factor. Why wouldn't I want to have a little bit more display? I mean, that's kind of the way I look at this product in 2022. Now, the other thing here is the front-facing camera. I'm gonna go ahead and turn this around. This is a quick selfie test in an artificially lit environment. It's decent. You're gonna get away with it. It's not gonna bother you too much, though I happen to know that in low light, performance is not quite as good as what it is in an environment like this. It's a snappy phone. You can do pretty much anything you want to do on it. You can game on it. You could edit on it, edit photos and videos if you really wanted to with that A15 in there. Just keep in mind, you are going to be watching that battery drain. You're going to be watching that battery melt down from the moment you wake up in the morning. And I think that's probably the single biggest drawback with this device. Even if you were willing to put up with absolutely everything else, this battery is just not modern tier the way that people use smartphones. Most people in 2022 constantly scrolling, multimedia, constant screen on time. If you are not one of these constant users, you can look at this. But if you are at all concerned, if you at all have battery anxiety, then I don't think this is going to be the phone for you, and you're probably going to want to spend a couple more dollars if you want to remain in the Apple ecosystem. Of course, if you want to go elsewhere into Android land, which is terrifying to many Apple users, but you could do it, then you're going to open up a whole different variety of options where the entirely different approach is taken, where it's not about getting a top tier chip with age-old hardware, with antiquated medieval hardware. They're actually gonna toggle you back on the chip, give you a mid-range or low-tier chip, but then give you a big display with a fast refresh and an enormous battery. So those options do exist if you're willing to trade and change over to the dark side. Anyway, go ahead and let me know down in the comments who you think this device is for. I think there are people out there that this is still a decent recommendation. It's all about figuring out their use case, their lifestyle, and then figuring out if you can make that recommendation to them. That's why whenever anybody asks me what's the best smartphone, I say, you gotta tell me a little bit about yourself, because the best smartphone for you might not be the best smartphone for everybody else or somebody else or so on and so forth. So you tell me who the iPhone SE is for in 2022, and we'll see if Apple continues to make it in this format. There's a rumor that because there seems to be a little bit less interest in the smaller phones, whether it's the Mini or this SE, there are some rumors right now that what they'll do next time is keep the kind of nostalgic design, but actually go up to the Plus model. And you can imagine how they would do that, because iPhone 7, 8 had a Plus model with this old school form factor and just a bigger display. Maybe more people would be into that. They'd get a bigger battery out of it. That could be a move for Apple. Amazing that I'm looking at a phone that looks so much like so many other phones. I mean, it looks identical to so many other phones that I've shown here in the channel over the last number of years. But there you have it. That's the iPhone SE for 2022.